We're going live.
Oh,
Okay, we are live. This is the Kino Corner KinoKast episode 1.5, Blue Velvet, take 2, Electric Boogaloo. Um, last night was last night was the dress rehearsal, and tonight is the real show. Now, some of you joined us in our Discord last night, and I think we had a pretty good discussion about Blue Velvet actually in our Discord, but hopefully we can bring that to this live stream. So I am joined tonight by Andrew Williams, my friend and co-collaborator, and Creston, aka Young Teenus, will be joining us in a little bit to get us demonetized, because that seems to be what he likes to do. And yeah, so we're going to start. I just want to start off by just maybe talking about David Lynch a little bit. David Lynch, who is known as a transcendental meditationer, but he sometimes directs films. He made Blue Velvet. That was his fourth movie in 1986. His first movie was Eraserhead, and then he made The Elephant Man, which he got that job from Mel Brooks, of all people. And then he made the sci-fi masterpiece Dune. But then he arrived at Blue Velvet. And Blue Velvet is kind of his, I think, where his aesthetic really sort of came into shape.
yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. Blue
definitely.
Velvet's probably the movie that got me into making movies.
Yeah.
So
Now,
here we are.
I would say that the movie that got me into, making movies was Eraserhead. I watched that when I was 12. My dad sat me down and said, "Peter, you're going to watch real movies now." And he showed me Eraserhead. And it kind of scarred me. I didn't really understand what was going on. But it stuck with me a lot. And I ended up exploring David Lynch. Of course, I couldn't watch Blue Velvet until I was a little bit older. And, when I watched it, I thought, man, this is so edgy. This is so extreme in so many things. And I mean, I loved it though. And there's a funny story about Blue Velvet. Is I thought it was going to be very awkward watching it with my dad when I was 16. But my dad had seen it about 100 times probably, because when he was in medical school, his best friend Rick, Blue Velvet was his favorite movie, and each Saturday they would drink beer and watch Blue Velvet.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, I used to be that way about Small Soldiers when I was a kid.
Dude, Small Soldiers is kind of underrated. It's stupid, but it is kind of underrated.
Got some great messages for now, and rest in peace to the great Phil Hartman. Pour one out for him.
Oh yeah. Well, that's a whole other stream. But anyways,
Yeah.
So Blue Velvet is the film that definitely is the peak, or not the peak, but the genesis, I would say, of a lot of David Lynch's color aesthetics, especially. Like, you see Twin Peaks, you see Blue Velvet in Twin Peaks, you see it in Mulholland Drive, you see it in all of his later films. And yes, Pabst Blue Ribbon. And one thing I want to get across here before we start talking about the film is something I said in Discord last night, so as few of you heard it. It's that David Lynch doesn't like it when you put his movies into words, because he is of the philosophy that you basically shouldn't be like talking about movies. Movies should be felt. And when David Lynch makes a movie, he doesn't really think about his films intellectually. He just does what he feels is right. So he kind of relies on his subconscious, and he relies on his intuition. And so even when he's making a movie, he doesn't quite understand why he wants something somewhere, but he just kind of trusts himself, and things end up sort of aligning in a certain way. So that's kind of David Lynch's way of making films. It's intuition based. It's not intellectual. So he really doesn't like it. There's that famous interview where he's getting interviewed by some Japanese guy, and he says, like, "Can we talk about themes in your movie?" And he goes, "I don't talk about themes, Johnny."
that's just kind of his thing, man.
Yeah.
You're right. It's education in almost an unconscious way, and
Yeah.
that's like that's
So,
what changed the way I looked at film, and that's why we're talking about this movie tonight.
yeah, and so when you watch a David Lynch movie, and when you watch movies that are very heavily inspired by David Lynch, or kind of following his footsteps in one way or the other, it's important to know that David Lynch doesn't exactly he doesn't really think about what everything means. It's more like he feels that it needs to be there, which is different. It means that his films are open to tons of different interpretations, because really what you're doing in a sense when you're looking at a Lynch film is you're projecting your own person onto the film, and you're kind of seeing it through your own perspective. And that's, I think, what is really a big appeal of David Lynch, is that his films are open-ended in that sense, and that his films are very interesting because you can see his films from completely different angles and have different experiences while watching them. So, I mean, obviously I'm a big fan, but
Right, and a big part of David Lynch's stuff is that everything is sort of a dream, and that there's a lot of different ways to interpret that, but this idea
yeah,
of film being dreams captured for us to visit. And the cool thing about that is that dreams, we understand their meanings when we see them, but we can't explain it. And I think that's the mystery of David Lynch that's perfectly encapsulated in Blue Velvet.
yeah. So what we're going to be doing tonight is we're going to be intellectually, I guess, explaining some things, talking about things that we just generally like, things that work for us. And just know that whatever we say tonight is not it's not gospel with how you should look at this film. What we're doing is I'm going to be, and Andrew is going to be giving some perspectives on the films, some ways to look at the film, but we don't want to limit you and your own interpretation of the movie. And actually with Blue Velvet, I feel like it takes place both in reality and in dreams. So do you want to dive right into the film right now? I think we can.
I mean, yeah, of course.
So something about Blue Velvet, oh, spoiler alert, we're going to be going very in depth and spoiling the whole film, is that we have a prologue and we have an epilogue. Right. Now, the end of the prologue, where I see the end of the prologue, is when we enter the ear in the field, the ear with all the ants coming out. And then the beginning of the epilogue is when we exit Kyle MacLachlan's ear. So, yes. Yeah, so there is a sense in Blue Velvet that in the film we go through the ear, and it's like going into the mind. And then at the end we're coming out of it. We're coming back to reality. And so the film can be seen as a sort of fantasy, a sort of dream, and there's hints throughout the film that it might be a dream. Like, something that stood out to me upon my rewatch yesterday is, when he's walking with Laura Dern on the sidewalk,
yes,
at night. Of course, Laura Dern's entrance into the film is amazing. Let's talk about that for a second. She literally walks out of the darkness as the music. She says a line. She goes, "Are you the one that found the ear?" or something like that. And then she walks out of the darkness into the light as the music just swells, and it's so just Hollywood melodramatic, but in that kind of David Lynch surrealist tone that it feels so out of place, because right before that, Jeffrey, Kyle MacLachlan, says to her dad, "Hey, tell what's her name? What's Laura Dern's character? Tell Sandy I said hi."
Yeah.
And of course, as he's coming out, she walks straight out of the darkness. David Lynch said, "I want you to feel like the wind." So, she comes out in this very sort of unrealistic way. Was she hiding in the darkness the whole time?
Right.
Or maybe she's being literally created by him in a sense, possibly within this fantasy. Yeah, I mean,
what would her name mean in that context?
Sandy? I don't really know.
Names for these characters in his films.
Yeah, so Dorothy,
Sailor Ripley from Wild at Heart, and of course Dale Cooper. Like, what would the name Sandy mean in that context of a created?
I don't know what Sandy means, but I know that Dorothy is named after Judy Garland's character in The Wizard of Oz.
Yes, which is
Yeah,
another recurring theme throughout David Lynch's work is referencing other films. That's why there's
yeah,
this like ethos of Hollywood in
yeah,
what he's
yeah,
read.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's so with, but I want to get back to this Laura Dern scene. They get onto the sidewalk, and then they're walking on the sidewalk, and the guy like they find this guy walking his dog, but the guy walking his dog is just standing there still, like
Right.
he just stands still. Uh, the dog doesn't move, and he just kind of watches them as they walk by, and I feel like you get this feeling that he's he's like a set dressing. He's not like a real person.
Right. But he's absurd at the same time, right?
Yeah,
Because he's this like blind fat guy who's walking this little tiny dog,
yeah,
and also that he's not the only blind person in the film. There's the other hardware store
yeah.
worker
The hardware
who's
store
blind,
worker who can always tell how many fingers Jeffrey has up.
and the number is four, which of
Yeah,
course is another spiritual thing in numbers in David Lynch's films, which could be like its whole
yeah,
thing. But like, what does blindness mean in the context of a film like Blue Velvet? Um, I I think we could have a discussion on it.
yeah. And Jared, you are right about Frank Booth equaling John Wilkes Booth and uh,
Hmm.
it taking place on Lincoln Street. So that is another like thing that David Lynch loves to reference is the Abraham Lincoln assassination.
Yeah, like historic.
It's
Yeah.
it's just it's I don't know, like it's just one of those things that Lynch just is fascinated with.
Well, and at the spoiler alert, by the way, for those of you watching,
Abraham
really
Lincoln
big
died.
spoiler alert. Frank Booth, who's the main bad guy, played by Dennis Hopper, gets shot in the head at the end of the film.
Yeah.
It's the same way that Abraham Lincoln was killed. So
Mm,
there's definitely like this is totally intentional. This is not coincidental.
yeah.
And sort of that's when all of the dream stuff sort of starts to go away is when the head is destroyed, like when Frank's head
Yeah.
is when
Exactly
your
that.
mind is literally blown, dude. These things are on purpose.
Yeah, that's true. So let's start talking about let me bring up my notes really fast uh from making this. So so this is a funny thing. So initially, Frank Booth's character was supposed to be like inhaling helium, and the idea behind it is that before he would speak, he would inhale helium, and he would speak in this like high pitched voice,
The
and
baby. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, the whole line, "Baby wants to
yeah.
do it,"
Baby wants to get demonetized.
Yeah. But then Dennis Hopper, being the drug expert that he was, suggested they use amyl nitrate.
Jesus.
Yeah, he said because degenerates like to use it for sex, and
Oh,
his words. But then he said, and so David Lynch had no idea what it was or what it was used for. Nothing like that, and I find it funny. David Lynch is like, he doesn't do drugs. He doesn't really know anything about drugs. He's like a super clean guy.
sure.
But it
Yeah.
was Dennis Hopper that said, yeah, let's use amyl nitrate. But then Dennis Hopper said that after they made the film, he was thinking to himself, how weird must David be to want to have a villain like who breathes helium for literally no reason?
Right. And well, the helium, it's the infantile state, and there's like the Freudian stuff, with the baby voice. And I mean,
Yeah.
it sounds kind of menacing and surreal, but I think the choice to well, there's a couple things I think about that, and it's like the choice to make it into just sort of him like this wheezing,
Hmm.
creature
Yeah.
dehumanizes his character and makes him more of a symbol of masculinity and more of a symbol of like anger,
Yeah.
especially against the woman, and also like not to get too far off left field here. His face does look like an insect when he
Yeah,
puts that thing
and
on.
let's talk about that. So we see insects a lot. We see insects a lot in the film. Of course, one of the first shots is literally going through the grass into the dirt and seeing all the beetles just crawling all over each other. And then we have the ants in the ear, famously. And then Jeffrey disguises himself as a pest exterminator to get into Dorothy's apartment. And I wanted to also note that after Jeffrey sneaks into Dorothy's apartment the first time, and she turns on the light, he scatters to the darkness, kind of like a cockroach.
Yes.
I thought that was interesting, and yeah, Dennis Hopper does have this kind of like insecty kind of vibe to him, which is very interesting. And he,
But what do like insects mean in this context, like of this film? I mean,
I think that
they're the symbol of evil. You
yeah,
know,
they're the symbol of evil because of course famously we have the robin at the end eating the cockroach, and you know the
yes,
robin being the symbol of love, and then the cockroach obviously being the symbol of evil. But I think that I think it's a good symbol because for one, it's not something that's esoteric. You know, people think Lynch is super esoteric, and yeah, maybe Twin Peaks: The Return and Inland Empire is a little
for
esoteric,
sure, for
but
sure.
Blue Velvet is not. And the thing about insects is that you know that they're everywhere, but you normally just don't see them. You know, that you
Right,
have
and that's what's
cockroaches
interesting.
hiding in the shadows in your buildings, and there's all sorts of beetles and ants in the grass under you, and no matter how beautiful something is, there's always these insects kind of teeming about underneath. You know?
Yeah, and it's the idea of like America in this film is shown at the very beginning. Lumberton, you have this like perfect idyllic town with these insects that live underneath it and thrive uh, in communities and swarm around each other. And
Hmm.
I don't know, it gives this idea to the sort of dualism in David Lynch's work, where the black and the white lodge, like from Twin Peaks, black and white throughout, red and blue, which are
Yeah.
complementary colors, um, film and reality. You know, like that's the whole point, is that everything has its own foil, and probably the insects in this way would mean that like insects are a natural thing to the earth itself,
Yeah.
and that evil is something that can't just go away. It's always around you. It's always going to be multiplying. It's always going to be feasting on the what's dead. And I mean, is this an idea of like America being a dead concept? I wouldn't say so for Blue Velvet. I would say that this is a film that sets itself in the context of this American identity that we have and this expectation of America. And it shows that no, like there is these erotic undercurrents and this violent world that we don't see every day, but until we like dream it up, then we'll like will it into existence.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking about like the title Blue Velvet, like
Hmm.
it's like you said, you can't explain that. It's a feeling. It's you can feel Blue Velvet, you can see it, but you can't explain it. You know, like you can't explain what it means. And
Yeah, and
yeah,
I want to jump in. Another thing about the insects is that when we think about insects and when it's shown in the film, is that there's this idea that it's not just like one insect, it's like a swarm. There's like this horde thing with insects going on.
right.
You know, it's like you know, we're seeing all the beetles just like swarming each other, and the ants, it's just like there's like coming out of nothing. You know what I mean? And as the evil is coming out of the ear, it's like this evil is coming out of the mind, and it's this idea that it's like not that it's just natural to the earth, but it's like impossible to completely kill.
Yes.
There's too much of it, and so you know the robin killing the cockroach is symbolic of Dennis Hopper being killed, but the idea behind it is that Dennis Hopper is one of just basically everybody else. It's you know like he wasn't the only one that was evil. I mean, for Dennis Hopper to do what he did in Blue Velvet, he needed half the town helping him. You
No,
know,
yeah, no doubt, no
he had
doubt.
the police force on his side. Like Gordon
Yeah,
was there, the brothels were there, all the club members knew it. Knew what was going on. It was, like the fact that he was pretty open about stuff that they were doing. He's like, yeah, he was the man. He just walked in there and shot them. Talking about the drug deal gone bad.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
it's like they're operating sort of in they're not scared. But on the other side of it is that Dennis Hopper doesn't like to be seen. Just like how when you turn on a light, the cockroach will scurry to the shadow. Dennis Hopper, he tells Isabella Rossellini, he says, I'm going to censor myself, but he says, don't look at me. Don't you
Hmm.
effing look at me. And then he says the same thing to Kyle MacLachlan later. He doesn't like to be looked at. And this idea that evil is always present, but it doesn't like to be seen. And it's kind of, Kyle MacLachlan, Jeffrey starts really defeating Frank, or really just by seeing him and seeing through his disguises as well. And, there's a whole idea of identity within this film with the use of disguises. Isabella Rossellini with the wig,
Uh-huh.
Jeffrey with the pest exterminator,
Yes.
Frank being the well-dressed man. People are playing different roles in different parts of the film, and they're playing different roles to other people. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It's and Blue Velvet is also just a film that's he really is like setting the stage for Twin Peaks. He is setting this world up that does change, and
mm-hmm.
there is this idea of like, do we control our identity? Like, do we control what happens because the world is going to change around us? Like this randomness. So like from the beginning of the film, when the guy dies while watering his lawn, it's
Well,
so absurd,
he
so
doesn't.
strange.
That's Kyle MacLachlan's dad. That's
Oh, it is
he
Kyle
does.
MacLachlan.
Yeah, so
Oh,
he has a stroke, but it
but still, yeah, it's
yeah,
that
it's
random.
it's a
That,
random nature to
uh-huh.
it, just like how there's a random nature to Jeffrey finding the ear.
Right, right. It's almost like it's like a dream. It's like you're
Yeah,
being guided through this world, and eventually there is this sort of. I kind of want to talk about the ending because for a
yeah,
film like
but
this with the ending.
let's wait for the ending for a little bit later.
Oh, okay.
I want to talk about a particular sequence that I love. I think is one of the best paced sequences in film, and
Go for it.
that is when Kyle MacLachlan, Jeffrey, initially uses Dorothy's keys to sneak into her apartment.
Oh yeah.
So he gets into her apartment. He's looking around. Then they turn on the lights. He scatters into the she turns on the lights. He scatters into the closet, and then he watches her undress through the closet. But then she finds out that he's there. So then she brings him out of the closet, forces him at knife point to undress, and then gets a little bit sensual with him, and then basically forces him to basically have foreplay with her. But before they can really get anywhere, then Frank interrupts them, and he goes back into the closet. Frank comes in and he does his sort of ritual sex thing
The dress.
with Dorothy. Yeah, with putting the blue velvet in her mouth and in his mouth and doing that strange thing while Jeffrey watches. And it's this. I was watching it again yesterday, and I was thinking how amazing this scene. Like, it's showing within a few minutes. You see the entire power dynamic between all three. And it's this sense of voyeurism, and it's like reverse voyeurism in a way. He's looking at her through the closet, and so sort of as punishment, she gets to look at him. But then she takes it too far and essentially does a sort of like semi rape of him, only for
In a sense,
Frank.
it's. I think it's more Edenic. I think it's more like Adam or like Eve, like tempting. You know what I mean? Like the temptation
Yeah,
sort of I don't think of it as rape
Well, it's not
because he goes
exactly.
back for more.
Well, yeah, he went back for more. Yeah, no, it's not exactly that, but it definitely was coerced.
Hmm.
Um, Now, would Jeffrey still do it even if she didn't have a knife? Probably, but there's definitely that level of that element of coercion. I mean, it adds to the tension, and it definitely like adds this like darker element to her because we see her as a victim this whole time, and then when she's like has the knife and she's like forcing him to do these things,
Oh yeah, I see what you're
you know
saying.
what I
Yeah.
mean?
Hmm.
Only
And
for
the knife is
only for
a phallic. It's a phallic symbol. You
yeah,
know, she is sort of
well,
taking on the masculine energy and pointing it at him in a
yeah,
violent way.
and she even stabs him in the face.
Yes, she
Yeah,
almost cuts him in the mouth. I think.
yeah. Well, his cheek. It's like right here, or something like that.
Yeah, it's weird because the camera like cuts in and it like zooms in on Jeffrey in that moment. Like it's a really weird.
Well,
That pacing you said really does lend itself to like the power of each character scene
yeah, the
because
pacing is great, and it shows kind of like it's a progression basically of like one thing, but it's by different people. Yeah, he gets cut on the cheek. Yeah, and it's a progression of like one thing, but by different people. So Frank kind of finishes the act, but he finishes it on Dorothy, while while Jeffrey goes back to his role as voyeur. You know, it's an interesting take because Jeffrey really throughout the entire film is a voyeur. He doesn't really add to it. He's kind of watching this fantasy. I mean, he's piecing things together in his mind, but he sees himself as a detective. He
yeah,
doesn't really involve himself until he gets involved. And I just love the way that scene plays out. And what that scene also does is it does establish a link, character wise, between Frank and between Jeffrey. So I want to get into this theory of mine. It's not a theory, I guess, but more of a way of looking at it, and that is that the that it's Detective Williams, Jeffrey, and Frank are all connected, and or you can see them as all connected. With Detective Williams being like the super ego, where he's all about the law and order, and
Mhm.
he does like hate the evil, you know. Um, then there's Frank, who is completely base, and he's like animalistic, and
Yeah.
you know, like he does, he's so unredeemable. But I mean, in a charismatic way. Um, but he is like just completely unredeemable. And then you have Kyle MacLachlan, Jeffrey, who's sort of in the middle there, where he definitely wants to bring justice to what's happening, and he loves the mystery, but he also has his darker side, where he does have these perversions that he's exploring, especially voyeurism and everything like that. You know, it's a
Right. Yeah, and it's also like almost going back to like Hitchcock and the idea of like watching people. Like, there's definitely a Rear Window vibe in Blue Velvet throughout this whole thing. We're sort of even disconnected from the characters, and the characters are disconnected from the other characters, and they're both sort of watching them play
yeah,
it out. And I always love to like take that to a meta of like the way that we look at movies and stuff as we sort of sit in the closet and watch these things play out. We actually don't understand the undercurrents of it. We just sort of attempt to interpret it.
yeah. And what's funny is that near the end, after Jeffrey has already gone past the point of no return, when he goes up to the apartment at the end, he sees the two guys dead, the detective and the brothel owner.
Yeah.
He actually turns back and he says something like, "I'll leave it to the cops to find him, to take care of him." He says it's something like that. Like at that moment, he decides he's giving up on this. Like he's gone too far and he realizes it. But really, what has he actually contributed to it? He may have sped it up. Like the whole idea that the act of observing something changes it. You know,
Oh wow.
that's the
Yeah.
double slit theory, I think, is like when you observe something, it changes it. I don't know. I could be wrong. I'm not a physicist or anything, but I think with people, that's definitely true. So when Frank learns that he's been observing him, he gets sucked into this, and really, it's when Frank meets him that's the point of no return. He's still kind of a passive protagonist. He's watching things, but he's not acting on many things. In fact, he's kind of a milquetoasty guy. And
I see what you're saying though, with the structure idea here, like the structuralist thing, where if you start to observe the structure, it becomes real, and you become involved in it. Like that's a lot of philosophy behind a lot of like Marxist thinking. And if you observe the oppression or the patriarchy, then you either become a part of it or become a part of trying to get rid of it. And I think David Lynch is just applying that in sort of a spiritual context here, that like you can get involved with it, but I think there is an element of agency. Like Jeffrey Beaumont definitely decides to go further with the ear investigation, even after he finds it.
Well, he did, yeah, and I'm not saying that he doesn't have agency in that, but he has agency in watching more, because that's what he wants to do. He wants to watch more. He wants to still keep his distance. But the thing is that the more he watches, the closer and closer he's drawn into this world.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, that's a great point, because when he's kidnapped and they're going through the candy-colored clown sequence and stuff like that to the bar, he doesn't really say anything. I think he says like a couple lines.
Yeah, he doesn't.
The Heineken one, everyone's just like kind of talking to him, and even when Frank starts to sing to him and kiss him.
Well, it's actually quite funny. When they're in the car, Frank asks him a question, and Kyle MacLachlan just goes like, "What?" And then Jack Nance just leans forward and goes, "He said, what?" Like, I always laugh at that. I'm like,
Jack Nance, the lead character from Eraserhead.
Yeah, the lead character from Eraserhead. Yeah, and I always find that funny, like, in a strange way. But that whole sequence is hilarious, actually. Where he's like, "Don't be a good neighbor to her. I'll send you a love letter right from my heart."
And like, what does that mean? Like when he's like putting the lipstick on his face. I mean,
and he kisses him.
And he's kissing him like the kiss of death.
Yeah, it's kind of an embrace. I think that he sort of realizes that they're alike. I think that's what it means. You know what Dennis Hopper said about his character is that his character is madly in love with Dorothy, but he has no idea how to show it. Like,
he's like a kid.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and that goes into the whole Freudian thing. Where, actually, when he walks in and she goes, "Sorry, baby," he goes, "Don't call me baby. It's daddy."
I remember that. Yeah, and think about like the lipstick, like sneaking out into the mom stuff and like putting the lipstick on. Like it is really Freudian, and the womb,
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's the colors. Oh, I'm hearing myself on.
Oh, you are?
On you. Yeah, did you take your headphones out?
On me?
No, okay, I'm not hearing myself anymore.
Okay, I'll just turn it down. There you go.
So anyways, yeah, we were talking about the colors on Discord last night, and I think that blue and red, and Brad Dourif is also one of Frank's guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, he used all of his regulars in Blue Velvet for all the all the main characters, all the speaking roles. But yeah, so one of the things I was bringing up in the Discord call last night is how I think that red and blue actually mean different things in different scenes, and I think that the colors aren't really there to signify much. I mean, I think that you can read in certain scenes that it signifies something, like definitely in Dorothy's apartment, it kind of feels like a womb. But that's the thing about these colors that David Lynch uses. I think it's more about the feelings that they evoke. David Lynch is a painter. Surrealist.
He is. He's a sculptor, a painter. He's a musician.
He's a Renaissance man.
I mean, he really is like an artist.
Yeah.
There's one guy who is an artist. You can definitely say it's him.
Yeah, exactly. So
any I wanted to touch back on one more thing that we missed from the scene with the kissing.
Yeah.
He asks him to play a candy-colored clown,
Mm-hmm.
and he's dressing up as clown
Yeah.
in a sense by putting the red on his. And um, in David Lynch's book, Catching the Big Fish, he talks about the clown suit, the rubber clown suit of negativity. That that there's this suffocating rubber clown suit that you can put on that makes your whole world negative. And for me, what that means is that a clown is supposed to make people happy, but it actually makes people very upset with the way its actions are. And so the way you were just describing Frank just now as being someone who's in love with Dorothy but doesn't know how to express that
Mm-hmm.
makes a ton of sense with the way that he wrote the character. Like, obviously, this archetype of the clown and like, you know what I mean, that
Yeah.
like laughter and mirth is something that David Lynch likes to twist and turn into something really dark and surreal, where we almost feel bad for laughing at like the horrible things that are happening to Jeffrey
Yeah.
Beaumont.
Well, that's one of the things about Blue Velvet. Yeah, I'm hearing myself again.
Again?
Yeah, let me talk. Okay, it's gone.
I'm not hearing you.
So anyway, so that's one of the things that I like about Blue Velvet that he does a lot is he takes these fairly like happy songs like the well, In Dreams not so much, but the song of Blue Velvet and the opening song, the kind of shoegaze song that Badalamenti composed, and actually David Lynch wrote the lyrics to. The sort of the main theme, the Blue Velvet, I think it's called Mysteries of Love. Yeah, and it was written by, at least the lyrics were written by David Lynch. But he takes these sort of nice sounds and they become kind of distorted. And this is something David Lynch likes to do, is take something that sounds nice, the score or whatever, and then like he distorts the audio as he distorts the video. And it creates this like, he takes something that feels like surreally sweet and turns it into like nightmare.
Yes.
Within, and it's really just with distortion. And of course, David Lynch's sound design is just beyond great. His sound design is always great.
Right, and a lot of people, like, it does go back to that idea of like viewing the 50s as this sort of idyllic America.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually like a terrible time because they were teetering on the the brink of nuclear destruction.
Yeah.
and it was just a really hard time, like rebuilding back from World War II. And so like there's this sort of element to doo-wop music and that sort of sound. Like you said, it's menacing.
Yeah, it's and it kind of like highlights this like menacing undercurrent to things that we find pleasant. And this is a good this is a good jumping off point to how he treats sex in this film, which is sex is both wait a second. Continue recording. Okay, I'm still streaming, but I'm just not recording anymore. Okay, well, this will be up on YouTube anyways. This is from using a poor man's PC. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, can chat hear me? I just want to make sure that I'm still up. I know that there's a bit of a delay. I'm just like really milking this, like waiting to. Okay, good. Waiting to hear about sex. Anyway, so
Talking about sex.
yeah. So going back to so like afterwards, right? Like let's take a look at Frank's sort of ritual, sort of sex with Dorothy, and then the next night, I think it's the next night. Jeffrey then has sex with Dorothy, and their sex is similar in a sense because it's violent. But in the first case, Dorothy isn't asking for it, but he punches her right in the face, like on the cheek.
Mm-hmm.
And in the second case, Dorothy is asking for it. She is saying, "Hit me. Do you like how I feel? Hit me." and she's really pushing him to essentially treat her the same way that Frank did. And we see in the first case that even though she's not asking for it, she kind of likes it. But at the same time, it's still sort of traumatizing, the experience with Frank. So it's kind of using this, like, he's drawing a gray zone between pleasure and pain, which, I mean, obviously, like, it's not, like, uncommon, right, in literature or in art to kind of draw that comparison. But what I actually found interesting about this is that there's pleasure and pain in something that was maybe not as consensual, and then the next night she uses violent sex as a means to heal from the previous experience, where she's kind of recreating it, but with somebody like Kyle MacLachlan, who is not evil, like not super evil, and actually as kind of perverse as he sort of is, he doesn't want to hurt her. So it's a strange kind of comparison, you know, between the two. And hey, can you hear me?
Who, me? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm just listening.
Yeah, so I thought that that was interesting, that it uses the pain, like pain is healing in a sense, in some cases.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things about David Lynch that actually turns him off from like a lot of feminist philosophy and stuff. I know I used to have talks with my cousin who's like a PhD in feminism or whatever, was that David Lynch does have a very negative connotation towards sexuality and the openness of it in Blue Velvet and in most of his movies. Not necessarily like to where like in Friday the 13th, where if you're a horny camp counselor, you're going to get, killed.
Yeah.
But definitely in the sense that sex is something that like almost opens a doorway, almost opens and there's like no way that we have control over it. And those that are powered by like sex, like, Frank juicing up constantly on his mask, are not good people, objectively, are very violent, angry people.
Well, yeah. Like
also sex and rape, I mean, is a huge part of the show.
Yeah. Well, let's take a look at the character in Blue Velvet who is objectively like the moral good.
Jeffrey Beaumont, probably.
No, I would say Sandy. She's probably the most of all the main characters. She's probably the most moral, right?
Well, she's the spectator of Jeff's life.
Yeah,
so I don't know,
and she's also eavesdropping. She's also voyeuristic on her dad because she eavesdrops on him. And so she's actually the person that sets Jeffrey on this mission, on this journey.
I think Jared's something. Jeffrey wants to help Dorothy, yet he's also perverse, but bad guy. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I'd agree. He does, like, and it was Kyle MacLachlan that was saying this in an interview, where Jeffrey has two kind of desires about Dorothy, right? That both conflict and also help each other, where he wants to help her. He really does really want to help her out of a situation, but he wants to also devour her. He wants to take her. But she also wants to take him. You know what I mean? And it's like she wants to help her family, but she also wants to take Jeffrey. And it's really like this it's this that I find really interesting. It creates this chaos. It creates this dynamic that is you're kind of unsure about what they're going to do next because they have these like conflicting ideas within themselves. But I wanted to say that Laura Dern's character is never sexualized in Blue Velvet.
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, you already did that in Wild at Heart.
Yeah, but I mean, it can lead you to seeing it as like the Madonna and the whore.
Yeah, exactly.
And but
you know.
I think that's a little bit too simplistic for the film, because I think that Dorothy is both in the Madonna and the whore. If you're going to
Yeah,
be
well,
speaking like that,
you know,
I think that I think it's a more complex situation than it, but and I think it's
right.
also more complex. Wait, I'll just finish this thought and I'll let you talk.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah, because
Is
I'm just trying to take this further.
Yeah, so Jeffrey, when he's kind of seeing, you can see it as like there's a whole bunch of like love triangles going on, right? There's Jeffrey, Frank, Isabel Rossellini, her husband, who we never really see, or it's her kid, yeah, and her husband, who we never really see. So I'm treating it more as a triangle. But then, there's the fact that Jeffrey is also going after uh, Laura Dern's character Sandy, but Sandy has a boyfriend. So
And that's a trying.
yeah, so Sandy is cheating on her boyfriend with Jeffrey. Jeffrey's cheating on Sandy with Dorothy. Dorothy is cheating on her husband with Jeffrey, and sometimes with Frank, and you know what I mean. And it creates this whole web of relationships through the film. So I would say that even though Sandy isn't sexualized, potentially maybe what the film is leading us to believe is that even though she is the one that looks like the most like all good American girl, we do get glimpses, we do get clues that she isn't as good as we might think, just because
Right.
she's a girl who's willing to cheat on her boyfriend with an older guy.
Yeah, and also I think she is a sexual character, but she's a representation of purity in a way that like her looks are the sexual thing. Like she
Yeah,
really is like the quintessential
and she
perfect American female. I mean,
and she,
Laura Dern
yeah,
is beautiful, especially with. I mean, oh my goodness, like when the film. You know what I mean? And
yeah, exactly.
like every character in that movie is sexual. But like going back to those trios, man, like everything in that movie is a trio. Like even the
Hmm.
two hardware store guys and Jeffrey
Yeah,
Beaumont, Sandy's dad, Sandy. That's a triangle. It's a really weird way of almost saying that like there's an id, an ego, and a super ego in every single part of this film. Like you can just start putting it out in different ways. It's like we're taking a trip inside somebody's mind. I mean, it really
yeah,
is. Like, that's the point of Blue Velvet is we are the
yeah.
truth.
There's
We are the
there's a great line that Laura Dern's character says in Blue Velvet, and that is, "It sounds like a good daydream, but actually doing it is too weird, too dangerous." I love that line. Although one of my other favorite lines is from Laura Dern, and she goes, "I don't know if you're a detective or a pervert." And then Kyle MacLachlan looks at her and goes, "That's for me to know and you to find out." But I mean
What do you think about the color yellow? Because there's the yellow
the
man,
Yellow Man. Yeah, I think that
very strange character.
I honestly think that the yellow was used to stand out from the other colors. It was used to draw our eyes. That's kind of what I think.
Interesting.
Um, but I'm not 100% sure. Red is definitely used a lot. I mean, Sandy wears like a pink dress, doesn't she? She wears like a pink dress. It's kind of red.
Hmm.
And red definitely, talking about sexuality, red definitely has, red is definitely passion. You know?
Well, the yellow man is like the most morally ambiguous character in the
Yeah.
whole film. So he really is like the most wild card out of everybody. And at the end of the film, we're greeted with this image of him with like brain matter sitting on his head, and he's like covered in red blood. So, I mean, make of that what you will. Like the yellow man is chaos in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
where the reds and the blues are very like polarized together. The yellow is, I mean, it's the color of like bile and stuff.
I think
And
the
he's the one that like steals from the police station, and he's also working with the cops. He is a cop, I think.
I think that the Yellow
And
Man is I think the Yellow Man is like what Kyle MacLachlan with Jeffrey could be.
yes, I
He's
agree with
he's
you.
like a more extreme version of him, because he is both the good, as in he is both the law enforcement, but he's both the evil, and where Frank is even like saying like he's the man, Gordon's the man, and
Right.
he encapsulates both, but to an extreme.
Huh.
Whereas Kyle MacLachlan encapsulates both, but in moderation, I would say. And Kyle MacLachlan's character does, I think, especially near the end, kind of embrace the more like good side of himself. He has
Yeah.
this, like he has the revelation that he has this dark side, and the end, especially where he kills Frank, is him rejecting that side of himself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's why
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah.
everything goes back to being super happy, and everything that was pure, the robins come. It's because he's killed. I think it's like within himself, he killed that.
He killed that demon. Yeah,
Yeah.
that monster.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and there is sort of a coming of age buildings Roman sort of theme there, if you will.
Yeah, it's
Versus buildings Roman, but
Blue Velvet's my favorite coming of age film.
yeah, nobody ever wants to watch films where characters don't grow and change throughout the film.
Yeah.
Uh, I do think it's interesting also at the end of the movie that we see the yellow man. He's like halfway breathing and he's got brain matter on him. And
Yeah.
then the other guy is dead and he's got the blue velvet shoved in his mouth. And
Hmm.
we are greeted again. I'm actually watching the movie again right now. I'm like pulling the sequence up. And
Yeah, he has the blue velvet in his mouth, which is used during the sex scenes.
right, right.
Yeah.
It seems that I don't really know what to make of that part other than the fact that like it's like you said, Jeffrey was looking at his future and being like, "This is who you could have been. Like,
Yeah,
you could have been
exactly.
the guy married to Dorothy, who's dead now because of the choices she made, or you could be the Yellow Man, like you said, who has no true meaning other than his color himself,
Hmm.
or no, instead you became Jeffrey."
Instead, he
Um,
became Agent Dale Cooper.
well, hey now. And Dennis Hopper comes in and he's wearing this like this like Burt Reynolds outfit.
Yeah,
And
he's the well dressed man.
he's the well dressed man. So the identity and stuff going on there. And again, like it is just a movie. Like you are allowed to just enjoy it and
Yeah.
realize that like some of this stuff is absurd and insane and it's meant to shock you. You know.
Yeah, and I think that as much as we're talking, so we're coming up to we're gonna hit an hour here in a few minutes. So I think that we'll stop the stream at an hour.
Okay.
Um, but for as much as we're talking about it and just discussing it, Blue Velvet's a movie that you really can just like put on and enjoy. Like it's a movie that is not hard to enjoy. It's a really well made, well paced film. It's fun. It's a fun movie.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. The well
Yeah.
dressed man outfit's awesome.
Yeah, there's like espionage in it, and of course, what's interesting is, when all the bad guys are finally killed at the end of the movie, they're back in the itself. I mean,
Yeah.
it's almost like the whole town of Lumberton is being reborn
Oh,
in this violent
I want to,
fashion.
I want to bring up something going back because I saw this in my notes where you said that David Lynch is kind of like anti-sex, right? When
I somewhat.
well, no, so
I,
so
I
when
would
it
say
so
anti-sex. I would just say that sex for him is a much more. It's a dark thing. That's for
yeah.
sure. It's
Well,
something that.
when Dorothy comes to Laura Dern's house, when they're inside the house in the famous scene where uh, she's like exposing herself to Laura Dern and her mom.
Yeah.
She's saying he put his disease in me. He
Wow.
put his disease in me, and it's kind of like, yeah, that's the sex with, it's like this kind of like taboo sex. I mean, I guess David Lynch does see as kind of a disease. Another thing I want to hit on before we get to the hour mark is connection between this and Mulholland Drive, and really between a lot of David Lynch movies, is with the brothel owner singing into a work light, but he's not singing; he's just lip syncing, and it's the whole idea of the music, like silencio or silencio. you hear music, but there is no band. You know, the thing from
Oh
Mulholland
yeah,
Drive.
that's from Mulholland Drive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we have
Or
that in Blue Velvet where he's singing "In Dreams" by Roy Orbison,
yeah, he's
and
singing in Dreams.
yeah, and in the middle of it, Dennis Hopper just turns it off, and and it's kind of that realization that he's not been singing this whole time. It's all been fake. That the fact that we saw his lips move and we heard the song, we thought that he was singing, but it's a very sort of fourth wall breaking thing that David Lynch really does like to do to remind. I think it's a way to remind us that we're watching a movie, especially that we're watching, that we're
Yeah,
voyeurs in this situation. Another
yeah.
thing, another thing is that just to kind of get a few like little tidbits out. So this movie was made on a $6 million budget, which was like nothing. Initially, they required a $10 million budget, but they ended up everyone cut their pay. They cut their pay down to do it on six. They shot it in North Carolina, and they found out that Lumberton was a real town in North Carolina, so they had to ask permission to use the town's name.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that was interesting. When Kyle MacLachlan and Laura Dern are walking down the sidewalk for the first time, David Lynch would play Shostakovich so that they would walk to the music to give it a sort of like graceful feeling, a kind of like otherworldly feeling that they're walking to a rhythm.
I wanted to just real quick right back to something I remembered from David Lynch's autobiography, Catching the Big Fish, which I highly recommend everybody read if you want to even grasp like a little bit of an understanding of like his mind and where it was when he was making Blue Velvet.
Yeah,
Was he was talking about that scene that you're talking about where Dorothy Valens is on the street and she's naked, like almost appearing out of the air in a way, like this naked female. It's actually inspired from something that happened in his childhood back in Montana. Him and his friend were like walking on the street, and they saw this naked lady running up to them, and it wasn't sexy to him, is what he said. It wasn't like beautiful. It was terrifying.
yeah,
And so like this sort of childhood memory definitely influenced the way that sex is treated in this film and in his work after that. So
yeah.
definitely check out that book and
And,
keep that in mind when you're viewing his stuff.
and
That is
Isabella
a
Rossellini.
dummy.
Yeah, Isabella Rossellini even said that when she was naked and she was kind of given the performance, she wasn't thinking, how do I look erotic? How do I look like hot? She was actually picturing herself in a Francis Bacon painting of like meat being like in a butcher shop. And that's how she imagined her body. She's like, I want my body to, when you look at my naked body on screen, that you feel like you're looking at like meat in a butcher shop. That
Yeah,
it's not
like
supposed to be attractive.
yeah, she literally. I'm watching the scene right now. She comes out of like woods in the background, almost like Night of the Living Dead. I mean, it's
Yeah, it's done almost like she's a zombie and she's covered in bruises and everything.
yeah, like she's a
It's a
zombie.
yeah, it's a very disturbing scene. It's a great scene, but it's a disturbing scene. And I remember, did you ever see that movie, The Squid and the Whale?
Well, of course.
You remember?
You rented.
Oh yeah, yeah. I remember Jeff Daniels says to he's like, when Jesse Eisenberg is going on the date with his girlfriend, and Jeff Daniels decides to invite himself along. They're going to the movies. And he goes, "I heard Blue Velvet was good," and then it cuts to all them watching that scene with Isabel Rossellini naked. And oh gosh, that scene is so great.
It's good. That's good.
Um,
And you know, like Blue Velvet has had a huge cultural impact. So any
oh
of
yeah,
you that
it,
haven't
def-
by
it
now, we really didn't ruin it that much. I would definitely.
yeah. Here's another just quick thing I wanted to bring up. I love this. I love this edit in the film, which was they said, yeah, it looks like the ear was cut off with scissors, and then literally like not even a second later, it cuts to caution tape around where the ear was being cut with scissors. Like
Yeah, that makes me so uncomfortable when I watch that.
and then I wanted to also note that at the beginning of the film, he starts to show, because the whole beginning where it's like playing that kind of shoegaze type music, and it's like this like slow motion montage.
Hmm.
He starts to show that underbelly because it's like Jeffrey's grandma or Jeffrey's mom, is watching the television and we see a gun pointing, and it's like a
Uh-huh.
revolver pointing, and you're seeing like violence on the television in this like perfect serene small town,
Yes.
and it's this contrast. It's immediately brought out. Of course, then it's taken into the its fullness when we see all the beetles just underneath the ground, that we
Just
can't
yeah.
understand everything.
And there's so much more we could go into that with like Freud and like unconscious violence and structure and sort of oppressed self. I
Yeah.
mean that we can fit into this, but if you guys would like to hear, please let us know, and we'd be more than willing to talk more about David Lynch or any other things like that.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, yeah, we're at an hour now, so definitely, like, I'm a big fan of David Lynch. I could talk about all of his movies for hours.
Yes.
I think that my next stream is going to be talking about The Scanner Darkly with Turkey Tom.
Right on.
Yeah, so I think that's going to be the next stream. I got to talk to Tom about when we want to do that, but it looks like the setup I have here works quite nicely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on, Peter. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, does anyone in the chat, we're going to have to wait because there's a little bit of a latency, but does anyone in the chat want to add anything? Do you guys have any questions?
You're cutting
Uh,
out a little bit, Pete.
yeah, does anyone in chat want to like add anything? Like have any questions? Have anything that you want to add? Anything like that? Just so we can respond to some stuff. I can talk about my my own YouTube for a moment here. Today was awful. Murray.
That is like all the way around. Like today is a bad day on Earth.
Yeah, today was awful, Murray.
Murray. You brought me on
So
this podcast to laugh at me.
so I didn't get to edit any today, but so my Tampopo video is gonna come out Thursday instead. Not gonna be coming out tomorrow because I was just slammed all day. Um, but right after that, I'm doing a video on Parasite, which is gonna be fun. But I'm really excited for the video after that will be on Uncut Gems.
Oh
And
wow.
yeah, and hopefully, because Terrence Malick's movie just came out on VOD, A Hidden Life. Hopefully, I'll be able to do a video on that in the near future as well. And I'm hoping to, after I kind of get through these sort of like movies that everyone wants to talk about, or that I feel like I have something to contribute to. 'Cause I'm not going to talk about every big movie of last year, just a couple. Once I get past those, I'm going to start kind of going back into doing videos on movies that I really like. So expect a video on Badlands, Terrence Malick's first film. Like maybe in the next couple months, maybe a video on my favorite movie, which is The Tree of Life. I'm still trying to figure out how to do a video on that. It's a difficult video to sort of think, and maybe videos on some other Wes Anderson movies, some other PTA films, some Truffaut movies. Like I was thinking of doing one on Day for Night because I just love that movie so much.
And
And
don't forget to join our Discord, the Kino
yeah,
Crew
join our
Discord.
join our Discord, everyone. I'll be putting a Discord. Here, let me get a link, and I'll have this so that maximum number of uses. I'll say 25, but it won't expire. Okay, here's a link to the Discord. I think that everyone here in the chat is also in the Discord, but maybe for people who are watching this stream tomorrow, watching playback. So yeah, so if that's all, Jared says Dennis Hopper really shines in this film. I always got drawn to him anytime I watched Blue Velvet. Yeah, Dennis Hopper is great. I love Dennis Hopper so much. Dennis Hopper was a real artist too. He was a film director. He was an actor. I mean, he did so much. He was also great in
Played
Apocalypse Now.
played King Koopa in Mario Brothers.
Yeah, he was King Koopa. He was the
He
bad. He was,
apparently
yeah.
David Lynch had a hard time picking him for this role because he like went to jail and was on drugs and stuff.
He was in rehab. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then what happened was Lynch was at lunch with Laura Dern and Kyle MacLachlan, and he gets a call from Dennis Hopper. And he had already cast Dennis Hopper. I don't think Hopper actually auditioned for it because, like, Hopper said that was the first time he ever spoke to David Lynch was on the phone after he was cast.
Wow.
And Dennis Hopper said to him and goes, "I am Frank." And then David Lynch goes back to Kyle MacLachlan and Laura Dern, and he says, "Well, I think he's gonna be good for the role, but I don't think he's gonna be good to have lunch with." Yeah, that was.
Oh yeah, he did direct Easy Rider.
Yeah, he directed Easy Rider and the last movie. I might do a video on Easy Rider. I love Easy Rider. It's one of my favorites. Especially the New Orleans sequence is just so great. It's masterful.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah, and I might also do some videos on like Hal Ashby movies. I really like The Last Detail.
If you do Being There
is great.
I have
we might have to
watched that film a ton of times.
We might have to do a full-on discussion of Being There. There's so much to talk about.
Should bring on like 3 or 4 people too. Like bring a few others.
Honestly, just the opening like 30 minutes of that film is like some of the best cinema that exists.
Peter Sellers is probably my favorite actor.
Peter Sellers is so great in there too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, like right now with Trump and all that, like Being There, the existential man as president, not a better time to talk about it.
Yeah, and Willem Dafoe. Yeah, it was funny that there were so many people that were like, when you look at the cast of Blue Velvet, none of them were really the original people. I think that Val Kilmer was originally eyed for Jeffrey. Molly Ringwald was originally cast, or they wanted to cast her as Sandy, but then Molly Ringwald's daughter objected her being in the film. Or not, her mother, I mean. Yeah, her mother, sorry, it's just getting a little bit late. Her mother was like, she's not going to be in this movie. And then, yeah, Frank, they eyed Willem Dafoe. A lot of actors didn't want to be Frank because he has no redeemable qualities. But that's also...
Those are the best characters.
I know. I think it actually kind of makes him redeemable in a sense. He's just very charismatic. I mean, Dennis Hopper just killed it.
I mean, he comes off as innocent, like you said, with like the little boy and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it all comes full circle. Like
he comes across as
evil and not realize,
Yeah, he's like a child, but he's also completely wrathful.
Oh yeah, totally unforgivable. And plus that kiss sequence is just.
No, and I love too this scene where he's like, where they're in the brothel and the guy's like, "Get some glasses." And she comes back literally with just glasses. He goes, "Where's the beer? I hate warm beer. It makes me throw up."
Yeah, he is always throwing tantrums.
Yeah, he's constantly throwing tantrums. And here's another just final thing as we wrap up our thoughts here in the last 2 minutes of the stream. A final thing that I noticed is that David Lynch uses beer to basically characterize the men. So Detective Williams likes Budweiser, Jeffrey likes Heineken, and Frank Booth likes Pabst Blue Ribbon. And I think what like maybe is being said there, and this might be a stretch, but I think what's maybe being said is it's kind of like they all have their favorite beers, but they all still like beer. It's almost like they're different shades of the same thing. And really, when it comes down to it, like if you were to give a normal person, like say they didn't know one was Heineken, one was Bud, and one was PBR, would they be able to tell the difference? Mm-hmm. I think most people maybe wouldn't, but maybe that's.
I would.
Well, you
PBR
would.
PBR has a distinctly watery, bready taste.
Yeah, well, PBR, but the difference between I think Heineken and Budweiser is a little bit less. But I mean, it's slight differences, but they are still beer. They are still the same type of substance, and that's kind of actually what made me think of the whole like super ego id kind of thing was actually the beer motif throughout the film. Yeah, it's like a weird thing to get me thinking about that. But yeah, so we're in the last 30 seconds of the stream. Andrew, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you guys for coming onto the stream. I know it's not a lot of you, but this is the first stream. We gotta start somewhere, and
It was a blast, man. Can't
we
wait to.
will always
Yeah.
we will always remember the guys who were here from the get go. So it was fun. I had a lot of fun tonight, and hopefully the next hopefully the next stream will be soon, maybe later this week. It depends upon when Tom sees the Scanner Darkly. But once he sees it, we're gonna hop on and do a stream.
Yeah, and we'll have Creston next time too.
Yeah,
so.
we'll have Creston next time. I know that some of you guys got to see Creston last night, but unfortunately, he wasn't here because he was out voting for Mike Bloomberg.
Base.
At least I think it was. I don't know. Like I don't know what to say about him. That's like if it's a joke. But yeah, you guys have a good night. I'm going to hop off. Thank you so much for coming on.